Are we recording? All right, let's do this. What up, YouTube? This your boy Darius. So I'm trying to do like a little schedule thing to where I can react, so I can stay consistent. So today, I decided that Wednesday will be Wednesday wrestling. So anyone who knows me know that I'm a huge wrestling fan. I've been watching wrestling since the late 90s. Like, I want to say like around 96, 97. Like one of my all-time favorite wrestlers is Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, of course, and Triple H. And what we're going to do here is we're going to react to one of my favorite channels, Wrestling with Regret. Like he's very knowledgeable. Like he's a passionate wrestling fan, just like how I am. What we're going to do is we're going to react to one of his videos, his latest video, by the way. It is my favorite wrestler of all time and updated list by Wrestling with Regret.
Hey, let's do it for the content. Macarena. Let's go. Let's get it. Big Kick City. It gets gritty when Mega Ran come through. The kid gets busy. Work yourself into a shoot, but you know it's the shit.
You do look like Jim Cornette.
Let's get it. Yeah. What's that scent? Maybe you should bottle it. Drink it and spray it on. Get caught.
Okay, let's just go straight to the list.
Can't look back. Who else?
For a long time now,
All right.
A lot of my viewers have asked me to update some of my older videos from this channel. In particular, my top 8 favorite wrestlers list.
You top 8.
Oh, sorry. Not now, folks. Not... Okay, that all in due time, but for now, just run along, okay? Just run along. I was pretty proud of that list of mine back in December of 2014, but that was nearly 7 years ago. Practically an eternity in wrestling years, and a lot can change in that time. As I've gotten older and the longer I've been consuming wrestling for this channel, the more my opinions have changed, making updating this list practically a necessity. To come up with a...
See, the thing about being a wrestling fan is that your opinion really do change with the time. Like, I remember, like, years ago where, like, it was cool to hate John Cena. Now, which is, like, to hate John Cena, to me, that's just so lame, It's like you guys cannot see that he's a hard-working son of a gun. If you guys don't like him, you guys just don't like him. But come on. But let me continue.
Rankings, I recently sat down and contemplated my experiences as a wrestling fan and the talent who've meant the most to me in that capacity. Not just the matches, but more importantly,
their one thing that don't change that night change is my own personal list. And you guys will see that on my second channel. But let's focus on Brian Zane's list.
Some of the names from the old list do show up on this one, but the rest have changed. So goodbye, Art Barr, Mick Foley, Hulk Hogan, and the dual entry of Heyman and Cornette. There's some...
I think Hulk Hogan racism had a lot to do with him not to be on this list. As long as Shawn Michaels is on any one list, I'm good. I'm good.
Blood in town, beginning with this entry. I guess saying new blood is kind of a dead giveaway. Number 8, Gangrel. When I first began to watch wrestling, I immediately
never know anyone who had Gangrel in their top 10, or in this case, top 8.
Tell you, the spring and summer of '98 had those in ready supply. There was The Undertaker, Mankind, The Oddities, someone else who's going to show up later on this list, and this guy. Gangrel will always resonate with me for how different he was compared to everyone else at the time. I mean, come on, the entrance alone was a thing of beauty. Rising through a ring of fire, walking through a flickering haze of black and red lights, and spitting out that red viscous fluid.
I want to say
he had fangs. The whole performance was iconic.
He was ahead of his time,
elbow and DDT.
No, he was a part of his time because it fits the
13-year-old kid who's just trying to
attitude.
figure out what's going on in this topsy-turvy world of wrestling. Gangrel was the right character with the right presentation to help me find my way as a fan. And it turns out he's a pretty cool guy in person as well. Number 7, Buddy Rose. Once again, I've got to give the Playboy his due. He was one of my original wrestling trainers along with Colonel DeBeers, so together they'll always hold a special place in my heart. Buddy's work as a jobber in the WWF was but a small sample of how he could go when he was on top in the Portland territory or in the AWA alongside Doug Summers. He was a smart, consistent worker who could make anyone look great and was surprisingly athletic for a man of his size. Even if I didn't have the connection with him that I did, if I saw him for the first time, I think I'd still appreciate what he brought to the table and how he went against the norm of what the typical wrestler looked like at the time. He's a guy who made the most of his minutes, whether it was on TV, under a mask at WrestleMania, or doing a silly skit where he made fun of his weight and covered himself in laundry detergent. That's part of history now. And finally,
Ew.
were it not for Buddy Rose and Colonel De Beers, there may not have been a Brian Zane. So at least there's
Hey.
that. Thanks, guys. Number 6, Dustin Rhodes. When I put him
Goldust.
on this list, I kind of surprised myself. I mean, here's a guy who I've talked about on this channel before, but never gushed about all that much, and I never bought his merchandise or echoed what he
Goldust
said on
is
social
really
media.
underrated.
But the more
Dustin
I look back, the
Rhodes
more
really,
I
but
realize
especially
he's suddenly
Goldust.
been one of my favorites this entire time. As I mentioned earlier, my mindset as a young fan was the wilder the better. I came into wrestling smack dab in the middle of Dustin Rhodes' run as a pseudo-evangelical after he set his Goldust costume on fire, but I knew who Goldust was from playing Warzone on the N64 that summer. After hearing what Goldust was all about, I was fascinated by the character.
See, Goldust had longevity to back him up. Like he came like Dustin Rhodes. No one could play with a Goldust character. Like but Dustin Rhodes he made that character the way that it is. So you gotta give props to Dustin Rhodes. It's the same with Mark Calloway with the Undertaker. No one could have done the Undertaker gimmick as well as Mark Calloway. That like it's just something that they did they really connected with the character that helped connect it to the fans, if that makes sense.
And kind of disappointed I had seemingly missed the boat on him. So when he came back in the fall of '98 for that feud with Val Venus, I was freaking stoked. I loved the rebirth of the character, and it ended up being one of my favorites of the time period. The more I've watched Rhodes, as a fan and as a critic, from the past all the way to the present day, the more I've grown to appreciate him as a performer. It's absolutely nuts how good he was at such an early age, and how so many of those fundamentals he had already mastered as a young man still resonate when he wrestles today. His longevity alone is something to admire, but it's the fact that he can still have these great matches and seemingly have so much left in the tank, you can't not root for him. Dustin's not only one of the better, more consistent performers of his generation, he's also one of wrestling's greatest success stories, emerging out of the shadow of his famous father as well as his own demons, and becoming his own legendary performer.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey everyone, it's Brian from another point in time here. I'm sure you're all dying to know who else I have on this list, but first, I gotta tell you about this week's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. It guarantees your online safety. I was pretty frustrated, but that's not a problem with Surf. It's a singular entry.
Sorry, Brian Zane, but we did want to get straight to the video.
Tag team after splitting from the Vampire Warrior, because that's an era in and of itself. Why'd I love Edge and Christian as a tag team so much? Simple. They were hilarious. These two had that perfect blend of being immensely entertaining before the bell rang, and then being all business once the match began. They had some amazing backstage bits with guys like Mick Foley and Kurt
Angle,
hilarious. And an all-out classic wars with the Hardys and the Dudley Boys in the ring.
Yeah,
Matt and Jeff had the death-defying stunts, Bubba and Devon had their tables, but for me, E&C was the perfect team of the three of those because they had the best characters. I was a bit crestfallen when they split up in 2001, but each guy went on to do great things for themselves in singles runs, both in WWE and in Christian's case, in TNA as well.
That's
Dozens of world title reigns between them, and countless amazing moments as well. It's not every day that both members of a tag team do well for themselves after a split. Some would argue that Christian was the Jannetty of that team, but he never had the fall from grace that Marty had. And let's not get confused. Christian still had a hell of a lot of accomplishments on his own. It doesn't seem that much compared to Edge, who somehow had even more accomplishments. I'll always appreciate Edge and Christian as a tandem for brightening up my week as a fan and for always getting a laugh out of me, and for their impressive runs as singles wrestlers as well. Seeing them both come back to action in the last couple of years
that was amazing.
On their own terms is the dopamine boost I've needed lately. You could say it totally reeks of awesomeness. Number 4, Brock Lesnar, 2002 to 2003 only. I thought Brock Lesnar, my former number 1, was a polarizing figure back when I first did this list in 2014. But my naive past self could never have predicted how much worse it would get. In the last several years of his run, Lesnar's become a literal boogeyman, somebody who pops up when you don't expect it to take a big dump on all your heroes and the ones you hold dear. Oh sure, they can say his deal expired in August of last year, but that means nothing. Once crowds come back on the regular, they'll probably sign him him back one day later. He can still be fantastic when it counts. His matches with smaller guys like AJ Styles, Daniel Bryan, Finn Balor, and Rey Mysterio have been some of my favorites of his in the last 10 years, and to this day I still defend the decision to have him break the streak, but sadly most of his post-UFC run was frustrating to watch. It's a far cry from how I felt about him when he first burst on the scene in 2002.
When first burst in, he was amazing.
Wall of a man who could throw
like,
super heavyweights around like they were
I guys had to understand,
like
2002, us WWF fans, so we were used to like guys like The Rock and Stone Cold and Undertaker. You know, like those guys weren't really big. Even Triple H back then wasn't like exactly the big guy. But Brock Lesnar, like he looked like a really like big guy. Like he looked like even compared to like Hulk Hogan or like freaking Macho Man or like other big guys at the time. Like he looked like he would fit right in, but he was perfect in the post Attitude Era region, if that makes sense.
Flanked by Paul Heyman, rarely said a word, and just flat out dominated. He moved and performed unlike anyone I'd ever seen before or since. This combination of raw power and phenomenal energy. He was one of the few wrestlers who legitimately terrified me to watch. That's how you make a great first impression. He was like a video game character come to life. His feats of strength never got old to me. He was just fun to watch. It's a template they've tried to recreate time and time again, but they've never been able to have quite the same success as they did with the next big thing. I don't really care how boring and one-dimensional he's gotten in modern times, because I'll always have this version of Lesnar to remember him by. Number 3. Kurt Angle.
Yes.
When I first made that list of favorites all those years ago, I always kind of kicked myself for not including Kurt in the first draft. I've often said that if the list were an even 10 rather than 8, then Kurt would certainly be on the list. And now with some more time and thought, I realize he definitely belongs not just on the list, but in the upper tier. Like with Edge and Christian, I fell in love with Kurt fairly quickly for his portrayal of this arrogant goofball of the hero complex who is still scary good in the ring once the bell rang. I love the juxtaposition of this legitimate super athlete who won gold in the Olympics, seen as a coward with zero self-awareness. And Kurt was such a good performer, he made it look easy. When they strapped
he was like the Carlton Banks of wrestling. That would make it so hilarious.
King of the Ring all less than a year, you didn't question it. If there was one person on the roster who could pull all that off, it was the company's newest workhorse who earned his stripes in record time.
He did.
He was legitimate, he was smooth in the ring, he was entertaining as hell. The guy had it all. I'll always love his hilarious Howdy Doody act at the beginning of his career, his main event run with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon and its admittedly underwhelming conclusion, his games of one-upsmanship with Steve Austin in 2001, his work on SmackDown fighting for the WWE Championship, and his transition into the badass wrestling machine that would come to define the latter half of his career. In the ring and as a talker, Kurt was one of those special athletes who embodied everything.
I was always aware of TNA, but that one wrestler who got me into TNA is definitely Kurt Angle. Like when I really started, that's when TNA really started to get good. But somewhere down the line, TNA I don't know.
Loved about wrestling and is one of the best all-around talents of all time. It's true. It's true.
It's damn
Number
true.
2. Kane.
Coin.
Ranking the top 2 wrestlers on this list was very difficult for me. If anything, it should be more like 1A and 1B instead of 1 and 2, but ultimately I'm happy with how this shakes down. I've told you all my story before, how much I empathize with Kane's character of someone who was ostracized by the world around him. He just had this look, this air, this mystique about him.
Any wrestler scared the shit out of me. It's definitely Kane.
He was a horror villain come to life, this perfect blend of drama and
like Undertaker, he was spooky, but he wasn't scary. Kane was scary.
And from that moment on,
I still pissed that he only won the WWE champion once, only for one freaking day.
Years later was cathartic on one level, but at the same time, I was a bit disappointed it had taken so long. It goes without saying that Kane was always an incredibly versatile performer. I'm not just talking about his run before Kane as Isaac Yankem in The Fake Diesel, but everything within the Kane arc itself. Time and hindsight have allowed me to forgive some of the less egregious things Kane had been through since 1997, and instead respect the man for putting up with so much of it and always making the best of it. Yeah, the angle with Lita was dumb, but at least he committed to the bit. But of course, what resonated with me more than anything as a fan was the more lighthearted, human stuff he was involved in. From X-Pac to Daniel Bryan and everyone in between, Kane's ability to evolve out of the silent monster trope was the key to his long-term success as a character. Kane went through a lot of changes in 20-odd years, and through it all,
That's
he
true.
endured to become one of the more enthralling characters ever seen in wrestling. Having a
If anyone
kick-ass
deserves to
mask
be in
for
the
so
Hall of
much
Fame,
that time,
definitely Glenn
no doubt
Jacobs.
helped.
Because
And my
he made
favorite
that
wrestler
Kane
of all
character
time
work.
as of May of 2021 is Chris Jericho.
Okay,
You know, I've
okay.
uttered so many words
Where the
about
hell
Chris
is Shawn
Jericho on
Michaels?
this channel over the years, they'd barely be able to fit onto his list of 1,004 holds. But it's not for nothing, because the man is simply that good.
He
I
is
don't need to
good. He's
regale you
great.
with his history, his list of accomplishments, his exceptional talent in the ring,
But
and
he's
in
not better than
promos,
Shawn
his
Michaels.
ability to balance between
Or
comedy
even
and
Bret
drama,
Hart.
and the constant evolution of his character that's
Fine,
kept
but this
relevant
is
and
his list,
influential
though.
for decades. From the moment I first saw his work in 1998, there was an energy about him I loved and wanted to see more of. I loved his goofy nicknames and catchphrases and his stupid sense of humor, morphing into the rock star, the serious guy, and then some
That's true.
ever-changing combination of all these things. I rooted hard for him as he came up in WWE, to the point where I'd get frustrated over whatever creative move I considered a slight against him. My feelings over where he was in the card mellowed with age, but my respect for him as a performer never waned. A lot of
That's
people
true.
want to shit on
I don't
Jericho
mind.
these days for the sillier things he's doing in AEW. They consider it beneath him or something, and frankly, I don't agree with that sentiment at all. Chris Jericho is a man who figured out a long time ago exactly who he is and what he wants to get out of his career. He knows he can pretty much do what he wants on television, and he's got the chops and the fan support to get away with it. He knows he can take breaks to pursue his musical career because the fans love seeing him when he comes back every time.
That's
He's
true. That
earned
is
that
fact.
right, and he's taken that opportunity, while at the same time building up so many people around him, not just the ones he's feuded with, but the ones he's aligned himself with. Jericho looks as though he's having the time of his life whenever he's on camera, and if he's being fulfilled professionally while still holding up his end of the bargain as a performer, then good for him. For all these reasons and more, that's why Chris Jericho is my favorite wrestler of all time.
And
Well, I
that's
hope you
great.
enjoyed my reveal of my favorite wrestlers, and maybe
I know
we'll
this
do
is your
another
favorite
update in
wrestler,
about
but
7
I
years.
feel like you
Which
should.
of these wrestlers
you still
are
should
on
have
your
a Shawn
list?
Michaels
Who's on
on
your
your list.
top 8? Let me know in the comment section below. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.
All right. That was a great video. I feel like you should have included Shawn Michaels or at least Bret Hart. You know, like two of the greatest wrestlers of all time. But I'm glad you include like Kane and Kurt Angle. Basically Kane, because Kane is not talked about a lot. But you should include Shawn Michaels. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for watching. If you like what you watch, subscribe to your boy. And you can also subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, who like I said, is a highly knowledgeable wrestling fan. So thank you very much. Peace, love, and rock and roll.